The night air in the Garden of Gethsemane lay heavy with anticipation, as though creation itself held its breath in the moments before the storm. Lanterns swung in the olive grove, casting long, quivering shadows that seemed to dance with secrets. Jesus, his face drawn with solemn purpose, moved between the ancient trunks, each step echoing in the hush. Judas followed at a measured distance, every nerve in his body wound tight, torn between loyalty and dread. He could feel the weight of history pressing down on him, as if each leaf trembled with the knowledge of what was to come. A soft breeze carried the scent of crushed olives and earth. Jesus stopped beneath a twisted bough, the silver moonlight illuminating the faint tremor of exhaustion in his eyes. He raised a hand to touch the bark, an almost instinctive gesture of connection to the world he was about to leave behind. Judas hesitated, his heart pounding like a war drum, until the teacher looked up and met his gaze with an intensity that pierced through every defense. "Judas," Jesus whispered, voice low enough only for him to hear, "tonight, the darkness grows dense, but it will not overcome the light planted in the heart of humanity." The words were a balm and a blade all at once, soothing yet sharper than any sword. Judas felt a shiver run down his spine, not of cold, but of revelation. In that breath, he saw the depth of Jesus' compassion, even for the one destined to betray him. Darkness pooled at the edges of the garden, and a distant murmur of cloaks and sandals hinted at the approaching guards. Jesus took another step, closer, closing the distance between them. His eyes, reflections of divine sorrow and infinite love, held Judas captive. "What you do now will set in motion the greatest act of redemption the world has ever known," he continued, voice trembling only with the weight of truth. "Yet know this, the price of my sacrifice is paid not in anger, but in mercy." Judas's throat tightened. The plan he had arranged, 30 pieces of silver exchanged with the temple priests, suddenly felt hollow, cruel, shallow. He swallowed hard, the clink of coins echoing in his mind, the revelation that his act would serve. A purpose far beyond his own understanding swirled through him like fire and water combined. He realized the magnitude of the role he was to play, not as villain alone, but as an unlikely instrument of a divine plan. At that moment, Jesus placed a gentle hand on Judas's shoulder. The touch was electric, igniting a turmoil of guilt and awe. "Remember, Judas," he said, "there is no betrayal so great that my love cannot reach into the darkest heart and transform it." Even as the words fell, Judas felt a glimmer of hope, a tiny spark that whispered of mercy and restoration. If this story moves you, please like and subscribe now to support this channel and encourage the creation of more compelling tales. A sudden rustle drew their attention. Peter and the other disciples slept nearby, exhausted, unaware of the divine drama unfolding just steps away. Jesus looked toward them, his face etched with tender sadness, then turned back to Judas. "Soon, my friend, you will face the choice that defines your soul. Do not shrink from it, for even in the act of betrayal, the tapestry of salvation is woven." Judas swallowed again, every instinct screaming to flee, yet unable to break the spell of those eyes that saw the very depths of his heart, its fears, and its longing for purpose. He recalled the years walking beside Jesus, the miracles, the sermons, the healing touch that had restored sight to the blind and raised the dead to life. Could he, Judas Iscariot, truly extinguish that light with a single act? Then, without warning, a figure slipped from the shadows behind Judas, neither disciple nor guard, but someone he could not immediately place. The stranger's cloak concealed their face, but Judas sensed a presence older than time itself, watching the exchange with inscrutable intent. The tension coiled tighter as the three stands of destiny converged: Jesus, the betrayer, and this mysterious sentinel. Lightning flashed in Judas's memory, prophecies taught in hushed tones by scholars, warnings of an agent who would accelerate events toward the fulfillment of ancient covenant. Could this be the one? His breath caught in his chest. The knowledge both terrified and enthralled him, for if prophecy held true, every step he took tonight was already written in the scrolls of eternity. Jesus inhaled deeply, as though drawing strength from the very air. "When the moment comes," he murmured, you will see that even the darkest hour is but the opening chord of a glorious symphony. The words settled over Judas like a mantle, weighty and transformative. He bowed his head, mind awash in conflicting emotions, remorse for the price he would pay, awe at the purpose his betrayal served, and a flicker of hope that beyond judgment lay boundless grace. As the distant footsteps drew nearer, Judas made his choice. He squared his shoulders, steeling himself for what he must do, even as tears blurred his vision. The path before him was stained with sorrow, yet illuminated by an unexpected promise that through this darkest act, the brightest dawn would rise. Unseen by all but Jesus, the stranger stepped back into shadow, a silent witness to the momentous decision that would reverberate through the ages. And so, beneath the ancient olives and the trembling moon, the whisper passed from teacher to betrayer, a whisper that would echo across centuries, carrying the seed of betrayal and the promise of redemption in a single, poignant breath. Jesus felt the weight of Judas's decision in the moment before the kiss. Time seemed to slow as Judas stepped forward, his hand trembling, the silver coins burning against his fingers. He pressed his lips lightly to Jesus's cheek, an act meant to guide the soldiers to the one they sought. Yet in that gentle touch lay a complexity of sorrow and destiny. The guards sprang forward, torches bobbing in the darkness, and Peter, roused by the commotion, unsheathed his dagger and lunged in defense of his master. In an instant, steel flashed beneath the moonlight as Peter's blade found its mark in the ear of Malchus, the servant of the high priest. A cry cut through the night, and Jesus's eyes, pools of divine compassion, locked on Peter's with a mixture of reproach and love. "Put away your sword," Jesus murmured, voice calm, though his heart bore the agony of betrayal. "No more of this." And to Malchus, whose blood stained the ground like crimson tears, Jesus reached out, touching the wound with gentle authority. In that impossible instant, the cut ear knitted itself whole, flesh sealing as if untouched by blade or violence. The soldiers recoiled in shock at the miracle, and Judas, stricken by the unintended cruelty of his act, staggered back into the shadows. A flash of realization tore through him. The one he had betrayed wielded power not of earthly kings but of the kingdom of heaven. He saw too late that his kiss would not snuff out the light but would set it ablaze more brightly than ever. The stranger in the darkness, a presence Judas barely noticed in his guilt, watched with unreadable intent before melting back among the gnarled trunks. In the hush that followed the healing, the arresting officers seized Jesus's wrists, clanging iron bracelets into place. Jesus did not resist. Every movement was suffused with quiet resolve. He did not fear the pain of imprisonment, nor the scorn of those who would mock him. His eyes softened as he glanced toward Judas, whose silhouette slumped against an olive tree, tears glinting like dewdrops in the torchlight. Judas's breath came in ragged gasps as he watched the procession of soldiers and priests lead Jesus away. The disciples scattered into the night, terror and confusion scattering them like leaves before the wind. Peter, eyes ablaze with anger and grief, rushed forward, but Jesus reached out, placing a hand on his friend's shoulder. "This is the hour," Jesus said, voice rich with sorrow and love. "You will find courage soon, but first fear must pass." With that, they slipped away, leaving Peter kneeling among the silver coins that Judas had dropped in his haste to flee. While the guards dragged Jesus toward the high priest's courtyard, Judas stumbled through the groves, blinded by regret. The memory of Jesus's whispered words, "Even the darkest hour is but the opening chord of a glorious symphony," haunted him, each echo driving him deeper into despair. He pressed his back against a cold rock, burying his face in his hands, the shadows of the olives reaching across him like accusing fingers. Meanwhile, in the courtyard, Caiaphas paced, robes sweeping the stones as he confronted his captors. Rumors had spread of Jesus's miracles, and the priests feared a popular uprising. They were determined to secure their power, to silence the one who threatened to expose their hypocrisy. Yet as Jesus stood silently before Caiaphas, his calm defiance unsettled them more than any shouting could. When asked directly if he was the Christ, Son of God, Jesus answered with a quiet affirmation, "You say it yourself." The high priest tore his garments in shock, conviction, and fear, warring in his heart. What they heard was blasphemy. What the heavens heard was truth. News of Jesus' confession spread quickly to Pilate, the Roman governor, whose curiosity was piqued by the insistent cries of the Jewish leaders. Pilate, a man more concerned with maintaining peace than theology, found himself drawn into a debate he barely understood. He questioned Jesus behind the curtain of his praetorium, seeking the truth but fearing the political ramifications. Jesus' answers were measured and profound, speaking of a kingdom not of this world. Pilate, unsettled by the conviction in those words and by the inexplicable calm of the prisoner, washed his hands before the crowd, declaring himself innocent of this man's blood. Yet to preserve order, he relented to the mob's demands. Back in Gethsemane, Judas watched from the shadows as the mob surged through the gate, torches bobbing like fireflies gone mad. He saw Peter cut down by fear, denying 3 times that he ever knew the man he loved, and his heart shattered all over again. Then the crowd, draped in coarse garments and heavy cloaks, filed out the way they had come, dragging Jesus through the narrow streets to Golgotha, the place of execution. In that descent, Jesus bore the weight of the world, its betrayals, its sins, its broken hopes. With every step, the prophecy whispered by ancient prophets trembled closer to fulfillment. Yet even as soldiers forced him down, he paused and spoke, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." At those words, the earth seemed to shudder, and the veil of the temple trembled as if the very heart of creation wept at the magnitude of mercy unleashed. Judas remained in the garden until he could no longer bear the silence. He fled, silver coins in his pocket, the bitter taste of betrayal a constant companion. In the marketplace, he cast the coins at the feet of the priests, proclaiming, "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood." But they, unmoved by his remorse, counted the money as profit from a deal made and cast him out. His conscience, like a ravenous wolf, tore at him until he saw no path forward. As dawn broke over Jerusalem, a veil of sorrow covered the land. The olive trees in Gethsemane stood motionless, bearing witness to a night that would echo through eternity. The stranger, neither guard nor disciple, slipped away toward the city walls, carrying a message only he fully understood. A prophecy, unspoken, was now in motion, and the pieces of this divine puzzle clicked into place. And so, in the grey light of morning, the world sighed beneath the weight of a betrayal that threatened to extinguish its greatest hope. Yet, unbeknownst to all, that very act would become the hinge upon which salvation turned, a revelation that would unfold only after the darkest hour had passed. The desertion of the night gave way to a pale dawn as Judas slipped away into the shadows, leaving Jesus bound and surrounded by torch-bearing soldiers. The muttering crowd that had gathered in the courtyard of the high priest's house pressed in close, eager to witness the condemnation of the man who spoke of love and forgiveness. Inside, Caiaphas paced with fevered intensity, his robes brushing the cold stone floor as he recited accusations like a litany. He claimed to destroy the temple, an elder hissed, and build it anew in 3 days. Each charge was more outrageous than the last, yet the council received them as gospel. Their hearts hardened against mercy. Peter, trembling and guilt-ridden, hovered near the outer gate, torn between loyalty and self-preservation. His sword lay sheathed, unused, a symbol of courage turned to cowardice. When a servant girl recognized him as one of Jesus' followers, his voice cracked as he denied even knowing the name, Jesus of Nazareth. A grunt from another bystander prompted a second denial, fiercer, but no less false. Finally, when a third accuser pressed him, Peter cursed and swore, "I do not know the man." The cock crowed in the pre-dawn gloom, and Peter's heart shattered at the sound, remembering his master's warning, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." Overwhelmed by grief, he fled into the labyrinthine streets, tears streaming down his face like baptismal rain. Meanwhile, the council, satisfied with their verdict of blasphemy, hustled Jesus forward. They sought to cloak their religious verdict in the authority of Rome, so they brought him before Pontius Pilate, the governor, whose hall of judgment overlooked the forum. Pilate lounged on his tribunal seat, attended by guards who shifted uneasily at the sight of the bound rabbi. The governor's familiar Latin commands fell on silent ears, for Jesus met him only with calm, unwavering eyes. Pilate wondered if this man's claim to kingship was a mere rebellion or something far more profound. In a voice tinged with curiosity, Pilate asked, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus replied, "You say that I am. My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my followers would fight to prevent my arrest." The simplicity of the answer unnerved Pilate. His mind, trained to dissect political threats, recognized that Jesus bore no sword and wore no crown of gold. Instead, he carried an air of sovereign dignity that transcended earthly realms. Yet behind Pilate's stoicism lay a thought. To release this prisoner could spark unrest among the priests and people. Pressured by the council's emissaries, who had followed them to Caesarea, Pilate sought to placate both sides. He offered to scourge Jesus, a brutal punishment that often satisfied public clamor before final verdict. The soldiers obeyed, dragging Jesus to a pillar in the courtyard and lashing him with whips until his back was a tapestry of crimson. Despite the agony, he uttered no complaint. His eyes gazed upward, as if praying the suffering might wash away something greater than his own pain. Released from the pillar, Jesus stumbled before Pilate once more. The governor, now visibly shaken by the man's serene endurance, said, "Behold, the man." But the crowd, inflamed by the chief priests, shouted in unison, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Over and over the demand rose until Pilate's resolve crumbled like ancient plaster. He washed his hands in a basin, declaring, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." The council triumphantly took back their prisoner, dragging him away as if his very life were a prize. At that moment, a tremor of fear passed through the procession, an iron-studded column of soldiers leading a condemned man. The weights of wood and nails waited beyond the city gates, in a place called Golgotha. As they marched, a lonely figure emerged from the crowd. John, the beloved disciple, had followed at a distance, determined to witness whatever fate befell his teacher. By his side was Mary Magdalene, her face pale as alabaster but resolute. They shared a glance heavy with unspoken vows of faithfulness, pledging to stand by Jesus even in death. Near the edge of town, Simon of Cyrene was seized from the throng and ordered to carry the crossbeam. He had heard the rumors of miracles, but nothing prepared him for the sight of the man beneath the weight of wood and sin. Simon lifted the beam with trembling arms, his sweat mingling with the dust of the road. As he passed Jesus the remainder of the burden, their eyes met, and a spark of recognition passed between them. A silent acknowledgement that compassion persists even when power abandons. At the halfway mark, a mother and her daughters wept openly. The women hung to the fringes of the procession, offering scarves and murmuring prayers. Jesus paused, his chest heaving, and turned toward them. In that moment, words were unnecessary. His gaze conveyed comfort beyond consolation. The women bowed their heads, tears falling like seeds of hope into the barren soil of despair. By the time they emerged onto the winding path of the Via Dolorosa, the sky had brightened, indifferent to the human tragedy unfolding below. Yet an uncanny hush enveloped the streets, as if the air itself awaited the final act. The cross, now a symbol of both humiliation and cosmic purpose, loomed ahead. Soldiers tightened their grip on reins, and orders were barked. With one final heave, they propped the wood upright against Golgotha's ridge, nailing Jesus into place as crowds pressed in to watch. Exhausted, bleeding, and yet unbroken in spirit, Jesus lifted his head and spoke into the stillness. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." His words, offered in the face of unimaginable cruelty, reverberated against the stone walls, planting a seed of mercy in the hearts of some who heard. Among them stood the centurion, whose calloused features softened for the first time. "Truly this was the Son of God," the soldier whispered, unmanning his helmet in homage. If this chapter of his passion stirs your soul, please subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support brings these powerful stories to life. As the sun climbed higher, the three crosses cast long shadows over the skull-shaped hill. The two criminals jeered and cursed, but one, moved by Jesus' grace, fell silent. With a broken voice he implored, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus turned his head and met the thief's gaze, replying, "Today you will be with me in paradise." Thus, even in his final hours, the Master reached beyond suffering to offer hope and redemption to the undeserving. The crowd watched in awe, confusion, and horror as prophecy and fulfillment entwined in the strangest of ways. The events of this morning would ripple through history, but for now the silence of Golgotha held its breath, awaiting the moment when death itself would be defeated and the world forever changed. The procession moved slowly down the winding streets of Jerusalem, the morning sun casting long shadows over the tormented Christ. Each step Jesus took under the weight of the patibulum seemed to echo through the cobbled lanes, stirring the silent walls with the promise of both agony and glory. The crowd pressed in on either side. Some wept openly, others sneered, and many looked away, unable to bear the sight of the Messiah reduced to a common criminal's fate. Simon of Cyrene, compelled by a Roman centurion's command, stepped forward to bear the cross for a moment, his eyes meeting Jesus's in a silent exchange, a fleeting touch of human compassion amidst the cruelty of the spectacle. With Simon's help, the beam shifted slightly on Jesus' shoulders, yet the burden of sin, both his own and all mankind's, pressed down far heavier than any would. The journey to Golgotha, the place of the skull, was lined with reminders of mortality, skull-shaped rock outcroppings, the distant moan of the condemned, and the stench of death lingering beneath the stones. Women trailing behind wailed for mercy, their lamentations merging with the muffled echoes of sandals on stone. Jesus paused briefly beside a weeping mother who recognized him from earlier miracles. He offered no word, but a look of infinite sorrow and hope, promising without speaking that her tears would not be wasted. Halfway along the Via Dolorosa, the unexpected occurred. The sky darkened prematurely, as though midday had suddenly succumbed to a solar eclipse. The onlookers gasped. Even the soldiers hesitated, shields raised against the growing gloom. Jesus lifted his head, eyes scanning the heavens as thunder rumbled in the distance. A disciple hidden among the crowd later recounted that Jesus' lips moved in a silent prayer, an act of solidarity with the heavens as they themselves seemed to weep. Judging by the centurion's astonished expression, no one present would forget how the sun refused to shine at the hour when the light of the world hung beneath its own shadow. Reaching Golgotha's crest, the soldiers forced Jesus onto the ground, arranging the cross upright with brutal efficiency. Two criminals flanked him, each nailed to their own cross in a grotesque imitation of his fate, yet neither knew that their sentence would become entwined with a plan far beyond their comprehension. The nails were driven through flesh and wood, each blow a note in the most excruciating symphony ever composed. Jesus cried out, not in complaint, but in a prayer that rose above the clamor, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." His words, spoken with fragile strength, hung in the air as though time itself paused to witness the moment. Below the cross, Mary stood with John and a handful of faithful followers. Mary's face, lined with grief, was illuminated by an otherworldly calm, as if she understood the cosmic significance of her son's suffering. John, struggling to support her, felt the ground tremble and heard the bewildered cry of the centurion. Truly, this was the Son of God. That confession, uttered by a man trained to see the world in terms of power and conquest, marked the first conversion born of the crucifixion itself. Even Pilate's guard, hardened by years of battle, confessed that he had never witnessed such a death, so spare of dignity and so rich in love. As Jesus hung there, the prophecies of Isaiah and Zechariah converged in real time. He was pierced for our transgressions. They pierced my hands and my feet. They divided my garments among them. Every detail fulfilled, every syllable of ancient scrolls brought to life in the flesh of the innocent Lamb. Yet the greatest twist was yet to come. At the very moment when all seemed lost, the veil of the temple, the thick curtain that separated, The Holy of Holies from common sight tore from top to bottom with a sound like rolling thunder. No human hand could have wrought that rent. It stood as a cosmic declaration that the barrier between humanity and God had been broken forever. Silent awe fell upon the crowd. Some wept in terror, others fled in confusion, but a handful stood, rooted, eyes wide with the dawning realization that redemption had been bought at an unfathomable cost. The darkness receded, and in its wake, a faint light shimmered around the cross, so subtle that only the most attentive noticed it. John would later describe how that light seemed to coalesce into an image of a radiant crown hovering above Jesus' head, a crown not of thorns, but of divine victory. Yet even victory must first pass through death. With a final, ragged breath, Jesus whispered, "It is finished," and surrendered his spirit. The earth shuddered once more, and a great stillness prevailed. The two thieves ceased their jeers, one turning to the other in awe. "This man has done nothing wrong," he said, "but remember me when you come into your kingdom." And to that criminal Jesus replied, "Today you will be with me in paradise." The ultimate reversal of fate, the final twist that transformed a criminal's execution into a promise of eternal fellowship. As the bodies were taken down and laid in borrowed tombs, the faithful few slipped away under cover of dusk, carrying the hope of resurrection in their hearts. Simon of Cyrene returned to his home, forever changed by the glimpse of sacrificial love he had witnessed. Mary cradled the lifeless body of her son, finding in her grief the seeds of a joy that would one day burst forth on the third morning. And somewhere in the quiet corners of the world, the whisper that Jesus had shared with Judas before the betrayal now found its ultimate fulfillment. Even the bitterest betrayal could not extinguish the light, but would instead illuminate the path to everlasting life. The body of Jesus hung lifeless beneath the relentless sun, and a profound silence settled over Golgotha as the mourners wept. At last the centurion bowed his head and pronounced, "He is dead." A sudden tremor, so faint that many thought it mere aftershock, rippled through the earth, stirring dust from the stones. In that moment, Joseph of Arimathea, a secret disciple who had risked much to follow Jesus, stepped forward. With Nicodemus at his side balancing jars of myrrh and aloes, he approached Pilate and requested the body for burial. Pilate, astonished at the swiftness of Jesus' death, granted the favor. They wrapped him in a linen shroud, its folds heavy with aromatic spices, and laid him gently in Joseph's own new tomb hewn from rock. A massive stone rolled across the entrance, sealing him within. As the final slab settled, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary pressed close, their tears soaking the cold rock. No one spoke. Words were powerless against the grief that pressed down on every heart. Yet even as the mourners departed, fear overtook the chief priests. They remembered Jesus' promise. "On the third day, I will rise again." Determined to prevent any claim of resurrection, they returned to Pilate under cover of dusk. "Sir," they implored, "we know how that impostor said, 'After 3 days I will rise.' Command that the tomb be secured until the third day, lest his disciples steal the body and declare him risen." Reluctantly, Pilate conceded. Soldiers, in full armor, rolled the stone tighter, stamped their sandals around the edges, and set a guard in place, sealing the tomb with the official insignia of Rome. Inside the garden, shadows lengthened as the soldiers took turns keeping watch. Yet the night was restless. The moon refused to bathe the earth in its usual calm glow, and the wind carried whispers that seemed to come from the very stones. Nicodemus, his curiosity piqued against all caution, slipped back toward the sealed entrance under cover of darkness. He watched as the guard dozed by the grave's mouth, helmets clattering against the cold slab. He was convinced he would glimpse the impossible, life returning to a corpse, but exhaustion triumphed over vigilance, and Nicodemus, heart pounding, withdrew unseen into the night. Dawn approached on the third day, and with it, an uneasy tension gripped Jerusalem. In the high priest's mansion, priests clustered around tables piled with scrolls, debating whether to bribe the guards to spread a rumor that the body had been stolen, a lie to snuff out any flicker of hope. They counted out silver coins. Once more, their hands stained by the same betrayal that Judas had carried out so long ago, unaware that the very act they condemned would bear fruit beyond their darkest arts. Meanwhile, Mary Magdalene rose before the sun, her grief mingling with a curious spark of hope. She gathered the spices and ointments, determined to anoint Jesus' body properly. At the garden tomb, she joined the other women, Salome, Joanna, and 2 others, each bearing her burden of sorrow. They approached with cautious footsteps, dreading the sight of the open grave, fearing both desecration and rumor. To their astonishment, the heavy stone had been rolled away. The seal was broken, the Roman insignia gone. Panic surged through their veins. Salome turned pale, whispering, "Someone has stolen the Lord from the tomb." But Mary stood her ground, eyes searching the empty rock-cut chamber. There in the morning light, 2 angelic figures in dazzling white sat where his body had lain. Their faces shone with divine certainty. "Why do you seek the living among the dead?" one asked gently. "He is not here. He has risen, just as he said." A wind like a soft exhalation rushed past them, carrying the scent of new creation. The women staggered back, hearts pounding with both fear and wonder. Mary Magdalene, tears of joy replacing those of grief, fell to her knees. An invisible current of grace seemed to lift her spirit, whispering of a victory no tomb could contain. Yet even as they fled to tell the news, the priests scrambled to find the Roman guard. A terrified centurion, or what remained of the guard, ran into Caiaphas's courtyard, proclaiming in a voice hushed with dread, "An earthquake! The stone rolled back, and I saw angels descend." The priests bristled at the tale, their faces pale. The narrative they had paid to propagate began to crumble under the weight of truth. Back at the tomb, Peter and John arrived, alerted by the frantic women. They raced side by side, Peter's cloak flapping in the wind of his own haste. John reached the entrance first, stooping to peer in. The linen cloths lay folded, the burial shroud resting neatly, untouched by human hands. Peter burst inside, his heart hammering. He saw the cloth that had bound the head rolled separately, as though laid aside with intention. "He must be risen," John gasped, voice trembling between doubt and awe. The implications spun through Peter's mind like wildfire. Every teaching, every miracle, every whispered promise Jesus had shared came flooding back in new light. He knelt briefly beside the empty bier, fingers brushing the linen as though tasting a truth far richer than any he had known. Then the plot twist that shook the foundations of belief. A quiet voice behind them said, "Peace be with you." The disciples turned to see Jesus standing near the tomb's entrance, his eyes alight with triumph and compassion. He spoke not of fear or reproach, but of peace, a peace that conquered death itself. Peter fell to his knees once more, overcome by a blend of repentance, joy, and unspeakable love. Among the startled guards, one soldier, a young centurion named Lucius, had lingered in the shadows, recovering from the earthquake's tremor. His imperious heart, accustomed to the clang of swords and the commands of emperors, now recognized sovereignty in a risen man. Lucius cast aside his cloak and rushed forward, collapsing at Jesus' feet. "Lord," he whispered, "I believe." And thus, in those moments, the greatest plot twist unfolded. Betrayal had catalyzed redemption. The guards designed to prevent resurrection had become witnesses to life triumphant, and the disciples' despair had blossomed into unshakable faith. If this revelation stirs your heart, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Your support breathes life into this channel and inspires more stories of hope and wonder. Dawn's light stretched across Jerusalem as the risen Christ appeared. To the gathered disciples in the upper room, their hearts still pounding with the memory of the empty tomb. Thomas, who had refused to believe until he saw with his own eyes, bent low in astonishment as Jesus invited him to touch the scars in his hands and side. "Do not doubt, but believe," the Lord said, voice rich with compassion. In that moment, Thomas exclaimed, "My Lord and my God," the ultimate confession of faith born not of hearsay but of living proof. This revelation spread like wildfire through the city, carried by trembling lips and wide-eyed witnesses. Mary Magdalene, radiant, with the joy of encountering her teacher alive once more, ran to tell Peter, whose initial skepticism melted into elation. James and John embraced Jesus, tears of awe streaming down their faces. The women who first gazed upon the empty tomb bowed in worship, their sorrow transmuted into jubilant praise. Even Simon of Cyrene, called to carry the cross, returned to the place of crucifixion at Jesus' invitation, where he now knelt in adoration before the risen Saviour. Yet the most staggering twist was still to come. In a secluded corner of the city, the high priest Caiaphas and his council convened, determined to extinguish any spark of rebellion. They shuddered as reports reached them. The tomb remained empty, the guards gone, and rumors of angels abounding. Fear gnawed at their hearts, fear not of Rome's wrath, but of a truth that defied every law they had imposed. It was then that a delegation of priests, emboldened by desperation, sought out Judas's grave. They believed that by desecrating the traitor's memory, they could assert control over the forces now slipping beyond their grasp. To their shock, they found the earth unsettled, the tomb open and empty. No bones lay where Judas had thrown down his silver. No remnants of the man who had catalyzed salvation could be found. Some claimed to see footprints leading away toward the Mount of Olives, while others whispered that the grave had swallowed itself, as though the earth mourned the anguish of betrayal and redemption intertwined. The priests recoiled in terror, for they realized that even death itself refused to hold the one whose act, though vilified, served the divine plan. Meanwhile, the disciples received a commission unlike any other. Jesus, standing on the slopes of Olivet with the dawn breeze stirring his robes, entrusted them with the mission to proclaim the gospel to all nations. "Go into all the world," he commanded, "and make disciples of every people, baptizing them and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." Their hearts swelled with purpose, for the betrayal that had cast Jesus into death had become the very instrument by which the good news would scatter like seeds across the earth. As the weeks passed, Jesus appeared to his followers in many forms, walking beside two on the road to Emmaus, breaking bread in private homes, speaking words of comfort by the Sea of Galilee. Each encounter reinforced the truth that he had conquered death and opened the door to eternal life. He reinstated Peter with a threefold question: "Do you love me?" redeeming the three denials and restoring the rock upon which the church would be built. In an unexpected turn, the man who had carried out the arrest, Malchus, whose ear had been healed beneath the olive trees, became a fervent convert. Traveled with the apostles, preaching the mercy that spared him, and testifying that the touch of Jesus could transform even the instruments of violence into vessels of grace. Lucius the centurion likewise left the Roman ranks, dedicating his life to serve the kingdom he once overlooked, a startling reversal that spread through the ranks of the empire like wildfire. The resurrection changed the social order in Jerusalem. The mourning women formed the first community of believers, gathering daily to support one another and share the miraculous news. The early church met in secret chambers and private homes, weaving a tapestry of fellowship that included Jews and Gentiles alike. The words of Jesus to Judas, that mercy could reach even the darkest heart, became a cornerstone of their teaching as they reached out to tax collectors, sinners, and Samaritans, drawing them into the circle of redemption. However, not all responded with faith. The Sanhedrin, desperate to maintain their grip on power, conspired with Roman authorities to quell the movement. They arrested Peter and John, forbidding them to preach in Jesus' name. Yet the apostles refused to be silenced, declaring before the council, "We cannot help speaking about what we have seen and heard." In a stunning act of courage, they invoked the very words Jesus had whispered to Judas, that love and truth could overcome any barrier, even the decrees of earthly rulers. The growth of the church confounded both priests and governors. Miracles continued in Jesus' name. The lame walked, the blind saw, and the dead were raised, not through direct touch of Christ, but through faith and prayer. The plot twist was undeniable. The one they thought to extinguish had become the source of a living flame that no force could snuff out. Reports of persecution in Jerusalem spread to Antioch, Corinth, and Rome, where new communities sprang up, each anchored in the testimony of Christ's betrayal, crucifixion, and triumphant resurrection. In the heart of Rome, the Apostle Paul, once a fierce persecutor of the church, experienced his own Damascus Road encounter. Blinded by a flash of heavenly light, he heard Jesus' voice ask, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" The orchestrator of Stephen's death became the missionary to the Gentiles, carrying the gospel to the farthest reaches of the empire. His letters, penned from prison cells and muddy roads, would become the epistles that shaped Christian doctrine and inspired countless generations. Thus, the whisper Jesus shared with Judas before the betrayal echoed through history, a declaration that betrayal itself would become the vehicle of divine love, and that even the darkest act could be reframed by mercy into the cornerstone of redemption. From the olive trees of Gethsemane to the steps of the Roman courts, that single whispered promise unfurled into a movement that reshaped civilization. And though the world would continue to wrestle with sin and brokenness, the testimony of Jesus' victory over death, seeded in a kiss of betrayal, remains the eternal plot twist that offers hope to every heart willing to believe.